Okay, this is the sixth video that I'm making, and this time I'm getting around to brand loyalty curves. Just take a note, up to now I've been talking about demand curves. Brand loyalty curves is a similar thing, in many cases the same thing. However, a lot of textbooks, marketing books, marketers, brand managers, agencies talk about brand loyalty. None of them talk about demand curves. What is brand loyalty? Well, I did a lot of Googles, see what it is. And here's one of the best ones from Investopedia. Brand loyalty is a pattern of consumer behavior where consumers become committed to a brand and make repeat purchases from the same brands over time. So watch the word committed. We'll come back to that at the end. To a certain extent, one has to be certain, or note, that there is a difference between habit and brand loyalty. We'll come to that in a much later presentation. But loyal customers consistently purchase products from their preferred brands, regardless of convenience or price. It is the or price that is very, very important. If you want to measure brand loyalty, then the one thing that they do point out here is that you've got to start from price. Well, in the first video that I posted, made the comment that the results you get when you ask people what is your usual brand, and if you then show them all the brands and you make them all at parity price, in this case it was 50 Rand, you ask them which one would they buy, you get different answers. This small sample was biased towards Castle Light and Heineken, and you can see when when we get to sold at parity, i.e. the same price as all the others, Castle Light actually gets a lower result than the usual brand question. Heineken gets a higher result. These are obviously two very different questions and has a big effect on your data analysis. I took these little pictures from the macro website just to demonstrate the difference between these questions. If I ask the respondent, which brand would you choose, prefer, is your usual brand, whatever way I want to phrase it, they will look at these and come up with an answer. If now I give them the full picture, which was on the macro website, where I give them these prices and I say, which one would you choose? Well, it's a different question. This question relates and is very similar to what happens when they go in store, because in store you have these brands, you have them at different prices, they are well marked as being on promotion, and these all attract your attention. Interestingly enough, on the macro website, you do not get all the brands next to each other, despite the fact that some are marked as being on promotion. I don't know why they do that. For my purposes, in these talks, I need to come up with some definitions. The answer to this question is really indicating your preference. Which brand would you prefer? Well, the answer to this question tells me a lot about your brand loyalty. Do you now switch from the brand that you would normally prefer to a cheaper brand because you're not really that loyal? Or do you stick to the brand that you had because you are brand loyal? As I said, prices makes the big difference. Let me jump to one of the conclusions that comes out of this little survey with only 90 respondents. I want to know, how loyal are people? Well, we increased the price 10 times. So we got started with 50 Rand and we worked our way up to 10 times we increased. 8 of those 90 respondents still chose the same brand that they did when we started the survey. So they are hyper loyal. 44 respondents, or 49% of my sample, half the sample, chose a brand at level 1. At the moment we increased the price to level 2, they changed. So we've got 49% that immediately changed when we increased the price by 10%. So you'll see there's about a 50% disloyalty in this sample, and that is not very far from what happens in the market in general. And here is your loyalty curve. It's a loyalty curve for Heineken. This one shows it by respondents, and right on the left you'll see the number of respondents that chose Heineken. We set that at 100. So our index is 100% of people have a preference in the terminology that I introduced. We increase the price of Heineken by 5 Rand, that is 10% increase, and you're down to 65% of that 100%, still preferring Heineken. You increase it by another 10%, get it to 60 Rand. Well, now you're down to 44%, less than half of the guys that preferred it right in the beginning of the survey are still saying I would choose it. And then you get to people, which is when you get to levels of 65, 70 and more rands per carry pack that are still loyal. I'm introducing 3 terms here that I will use. Preference for the first people when everything was at par. Slight loyal, well, people that stuck around for another 5 Rand or 10 Rand. And then, of course, people that stuck around for bigger money. Well, let's look at the all brands. What happens to all the brands? I've only taken those that had more than 10% of the sample using them. And again, I set the demand curve starting from 100 and see who remains loyal. You've seen the dark blue, you've seen green, which is Heineken. See how fast that goes down. You can compare that with what happens to, say, Windhoek Light. The moment that gets to 65 Rand, nobody's left. No more respondents say that they will buy it. And then you get Amstel, which has a high level of loyalty, but it decreases when it gets to the very high prices. And the light blue line, which is Castle Light, is running just below that of Heineken, up to 65 Rand, and you can see it then stabilizes. 33% of the original 100 are still saying I will buy, and that's all the way up to 80 Rand per pack. It becomes very interesting whether those are heavy users, whether those are light users, etc., etc. Well, Byron is not paying me any commission for promoting his book. But one of the things that Byron does, and he works for the Edinburgh Das Institute, which Professor Ehrenberg was in London. They then set up the institute in Australia. They look at big samples of data across brands, across categories, across the world, and try to see whether they can come out with the immutable laws of marketing. Interestingly, it says what marketers don't know. The book itself has got its proponents and people that are against it. You cannot argue against the data that it shows. You might argue with these interpretations here and there, which makes it unpopular. On page 89, that is where he comes to brand loyalty. He talks about passionate consumer commitment. And I really recommend you to spend a bit of time reading that, especially if you're going to look at the next videos. Okay, this is going to be the end of this very short video. Here's a continuity about what we've done and what I'm going to do. I've introduced brand loyalty curves, and I've so far only talked about what happens to these when you look at it by respondent, at respondent level. Remember, respondent level is what you normally look at in your consumer research. However, there's a big difference in the brand loyalty curve when you look at it by volumes. How much volume are you using? And that depends on whether the light users or the heavy users are leaving your brand when you put pressure on them via price. Then it's more important to look at the value, and that is really where it matters. Because remember, as you put pressure on price, those that remain are paying more, so you are getting more money. And in the end, I look at is it the heavy users or the light users that are loyal? Heavy users, well, they should know the category much better and therefore be better judges. On the other hand, they will be paying a lot more if they are staying loyal. These are big and important slides, especially since you as a marketer will be working with respondent data normally. Then you will be looking at the volume shares as reported by Nielsen or whatever retail audit you have. And in some cases, you will be gaining respondents, but you may be losing volume. And of course, when you then start to talk to the accountants, they look at the value. How much money did you get? Well, you can get by discounting price, and if you discount price, you may get volume, you may even get respondents. They're not interested in that. At the end of the day, they are looking at whether you got enough money to pay their salaries. And after I've done those, which I suppose will be 2 videos, then I'm going to talk about brand loyalty curves and demand curves. What is the relationship between them? Thank you.